Yeah, so my name is Matt Crawford. I'm the head coach at UC Santa Cruz. My history in swimming. So I grew up. I was a rec kid. I was on rec from when I was, I guess, 9 years old until I was 18. Swam, played water polo in high school. This is in the Sacramento area, suburbs outside of Sacramento, and I popped one good 50 freestyle at the right time at a high school championship meet, and I got recruited to swim at UC Davis, and I wound up going there, and yeah, so when I was there, I had kind of slow start to my career and got better as I went, but my coach and his wife, so Peter Motikaitis and Corinne Motikaitis, they took over like a small rec USA hybrid at the time, and called the Davis Aqua Monsters, and they gave me my first coaching job when I was 19 years old. I just had age groupers to start, but I stayed with them for 11 years. And so over the course of those 11 years, they kind of, that first group I had, as it grew, they kind of kept me with them for about 10 years straight, moving me up through the age groups. And so I got a really unique experience with my first job, in that I got to kind of coach everything from, like 8 and unders all the way up to, a senior group, which I also at one point had a post grad who had swum at Stanford named Jake Allen in. So I kind of got a really healthy mix. Um, and then from there, I coached a couple years in Elk Grove, which is south of Sacramento, like 20 minutes south of Sacramento. And I had a senior group at it was called Elk Grove Aquatics Club. Um, and then a buddy of mine there, Nolan, he had swum at UC Santa Cruz. And a friend of his was the head coach at the time, and he asked me, like I have a friend, he's looking for a coach to run his sprint group. And so I applied for that position. I wound up getting it, and so that was the associate head coach position. Um, and so that was I got there in the fall of 2018. And 2 months into that, they put the head coach on leave, and they ended up not bringing him back. I was interim head coach for that time during that season. So I finished out the season as interim, and then applied for and got the position as the full-time head coach that was decided upon in the spring of that year.
So pretty quickly you got thrust into like the being the main guy.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was my first college coaching gig. I'd been around plenty of college coaching because while I was at Alka Monsters, when I was in Davis, my coach was, he was the head coach still at UC Davis. The men's team was cut in 2010, but he was still, he was the associate head coach for the women's program for until 2021, I want to say. But so the whole time I was, you know, near college swimming, I had been around him and kind of helped out while he was coaching Scott Welts in his run up to making the Olympic team in 2012. But I had never run a college program, and so it was a lot of just kind of learning on the fly and trying to figure things out as I went. And during that time, I wasn't to have any contact with the head coach who was on leave, and so I kind of, there's Kim Mush had coached there for several years. He was around and he helped me out a little bit. And then my assistant who was running the distance group, Joel, he was really great. But yeah, it was kind of like, all right, here's the program. Do what you will with it. And for the most part, it went relatively okay. That team was a team where, it was coming out of a history for UC Santa Cruz. So for 5 years, they had athletics on the chopping block, not just the swim team or anything, but they considered doing away with varsity athletics entirely. That ended in 2017. So, but most of the athletes who were there had agreed to go and swim at UC Santa Cruz with the caveat that that team might only be there for a season. Um, so we had quite a mix, there's of talent levels, dedication levels. Some of the academics weren't so hot. There was a lot going on in that team where it was just like we just kind of needed stability, and so that's what I tried to provide that first season as an interim. And we got through it. We did okay at conference. And we got second place on the men's side. I believe the women were 11th that year. Our women's side of the conference has way more teams than the men, twice as many. But for the most part, it was mostly just trying to get it through smooth, and I thought I did an okay job with that. But
It's an interesting position to be put in as like first of all being a new coach on the team and then being put into that leadership role. You're kind of starting from like square one, and it's almost like with the right mind and the right person at the helm, you can create something pretty unique and like successful from that like starting at square one point.
yeah, um, it it was a gift in that it was kind of starting from scratch, and so I could kind of do it the way I wanted to do it. My coach in college, I reached out to him almost immediately, got some perspective from him. Sage at San Jose State has been super helpful in terms of just kind of giving me pointers here and there. But yeah, it was a chance to reestablish the team culture in a way that I saw fit and like I thought would be sustainable and build for the future. And in a sense, that was kind of up in the air because I didn't know that I would be hired on as the full-time coach after that season. That was yet to be determined. Um, but just setting really basic expectations about showing up to the practices you're expected to be at, which was something that team wasn't necessarily doing at first. And then being supportive of one another, bringing a positive attitude to the pool deck every day, and understanding that nobody had to be there. It's a Division III team. None of you are on scholarship. Like, only do this if this is something you really, really want to do and something you feel strongly about, something you're passionate about. And so that next season with new expectations, we did have some people that decided not to come back. They were just like, well, I don't want to do it if I have to do it at this level where I am having to make all of my practices every week or whatever it was. But the people who stuck around were great. We had really good leadership, especially on the men's side that season. Two guys, Mark and Paul, and they bought in immediately. They wanted to work hard, and they were really wanted to be good stewards of our program, and you know get things moving in a way that we could be proud of, and that when they graduated, they could be proud of and excited about what was going to come next.
So coaching for Santa Cruz, it happens to be the only Division III college in the UC system, and one of very few Division III colleges in the whole state of California. And if I'm right, it might be like I think it's the only swimming D3 college in California. I might be wrong about that.
No, actually, so there's a number of D3s in Southern California. Pomona Pitzer, Claremont McKenna, Caltech, Chapman, Whittier. So they're all in the SCIAC. So it's a really cool little conference, and really competitive. Pomona Pitzer and Claremont being the most competitive teams in that conference right now. But so they're there, but we are tremendously unique, not just in California, but throughout the entire country, in that we are a large public institution, and most D3s are very small private institutions. And so our challenges that we face are way, way different. And I think the recruits that are attracted to our program are way different than the ones that are attracted to, say, a Pomona Pitzer or a Claremont. But yeah, so it's really unique in that you have the quarter system, which is one of the challenges for most of the UC system. I think Berkeley may be the only UC not on quarter. So the academics move quick and they're rigorous. So in as a D3 institution, academics always have to come first. They're on the forefront. We don't want to ever feel like we're putting the athletes in a position where they're compromising their academics to be athletes. So with that said, like, we try to be very accommodating. We run a schedule where there's more practices available to them than we want them at. So we run 13 workouts a week with the expectation that they're at 8. And that's to give them flexibility in how they schedule their classes, and so that they're always on track to graduate. They're not put in a position where they're putting off classes that they should be taking, just so they can be at swim practice. And that presents challenges for the coaching staff. It makes the team a little less cohesive in the sense that we're not always at the same practices, with the exception of mornings and Saturday. But it's what we have to do to make sure that everyone is in a position to take the courses they need. Um, and yeah, quite often I'm recruiting against other UCs, or I'm recruiting against Cal Poly is a really common one, because those are the sorts of schools that the recruits are drawn to, and so it's looking for um, a public institution with certain majors, certain kinds of academics for them, and certain opportunities, and so it's very rare I'm actually losing athletes to the SCIAC schools or other D3s.
So you touched on it a bit earlier with talking about those D3 schools that you guys swim against. But how do you decide when planning out the season? Like, these are the schools we're going to compete against. These are the invitationals we're going to go to. Is there a lot of travel involved in that?
So again, back to the academic element, we try to mitigate the amount of missed class for travel. So a lot of the time we're competing against who's nearby. So like we compete against UOP every year, even though they're a D1, and we compete against Cal Poly every year, even though they're D1. Um, and then our conference, we are not actually in a D3 conference. We're in a with a PCSC, which is predominantly D2. The next most represented is NAIA, and then there's one Division I team on the women's side, that's Loyola Marymount, and then we're the only D3. So we do try and make a point of getting to those nearby schools. Fresno Pacific is in our conference; they're a D2, so we see them every year. And then we try to make a point of getting down to LA at least once a year so we can compete against some of the other teams in our conference. Biola and Concordia are a really good, pretty even match for both sides of my program. So the men and the women are competitive with them. We try to see them every year as well. And then in terms of invites, we host an invite in the fall, which is really fun. We get really good representation from our conference, and then College of Idaho typically comes down, and then Southwest Oregon Community College also comes down to that. Um, and then our midseason, the past few years, we've gone to the Laverne Invite. So that one is predominantly D2 and D3. So it's a great place for us to get in a trials final setting where we're somewhat rested and suited up, and compete for those spots with really appropriate levels of competition. Last season we won that meet, on the men's side, and this season we had a really nice meet there, broke some school records on the women's side, and so that meets something we target, and one we really like. And then, but everything's mainly gearing up for the conference championship in February.
I think it puts the school and kind of the team in kind of an interesting position of like a lot of the teams surrounding you in the immediate area, like UOP, for example, is probably a much faster team. But it's something that my coach does on purpose sometimes is he'll have us compete against schools outside of our conference that would be like top two or three at states, but are significantly better than us. So that we get that experience competing against a much faster team. And then when we go back and compete at like our conference championships, we're competing against schools that are closer to our level, but we've gotten that experience against teams that have people who are number two, number three in the state.
Yeah, and I think that's good. Like, a good rule of thumb is probably, a couple, like a healthy mix of competition that you're maybe a little bit above as much as you can, of where you're pretty even. But, I think seeing teams that are a little more talented than you, or you kind of going into it and know you're going to lose that meet, can be good, because, it teaches you to go out and race people regardless of how talented they are, like you're trying to beat them. Like our men's 4x1 almost beat UOPs at our dual meet against them in October. Like and it was three freshmen and a sophomore too. So it's them getting up, being excited to race, and taking a shot at a more talented team, regardless. And that's what we want to see, because we are on a somewhat uneven playing field when it comes to our conference, just in terms of, there's the other teams get a couple extra weeks of training on us, and some of them have scholarships, and most of them can affect the admissions process, and so it's a really interesting conference in that it's wide ranging in how the teams are comprised. So we want to go in there feeling like we can compete with anybody when it comes to that meet, and I think, yeah, seeing a Cal Poly and a UOP, or even like a really high level D2 that we'll see in January. Simon Fraser, they're very good coming down from Canada. um, those things set us up for success, I think.
So, so touching back again on, you talked about like your very first season at the school and like the associate head coach position and how you became interim head coach. Can you compare that first season with the team to like this current season? Like, how has the team grown, and like have you reached any of the goals that you set out to reach? And then like, are there any new goals that you're working on?
Yeah, so like I said, like that
It's a
that
loaded
first
question.
season.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. That first season, ultimately it was like, well, let's just try and bring a little bit of stability here, and hopefully swim fast at conference. But at that time, like, a lot of the athletes that were on that team were on it because it was one of the only places they could swim. And like that's changed a little bit in terms of how we recruit and everything. But yeah, the goals for that following season, you know, we went in with a goal of the men winning the conference championship, and that was a goal we were able to attain, and I think that's kind of the mindset every season is for the on the men's side, at least, just because the conference is, quite frankly, less competitive on the men's side. We go in with that mentality that we're trying to win. And then on the women's side, it was a side of the program that was a lot further behind the men at the time, and so for those next couple of years, I invested a lot of recruiting effort into the women's side of the program, and the women who are seniors right now, they were a big part of one of those first recruiting classes. They actually were freshmen during the COVID season following 2020. But they were a game changer, and a big goal of mine at the time was to get the women's side as competitive as the men's. Um, and and that's been something that they were instrumental in. We had two women come in that year who were higher end recruits for us, Vivi Raker and Maddie Grunder. And Vivi has since had to stop because of an injury, but they brought a whole new level of competitiveness to that side of the program. And like I said, I think they were 11th that first season. The past two seasons we've been fifth, and now we have our eyes on that side of the program are the goal of getting to being a podium team in the conference, so being a top three team. And then on both sides, we're starting to set our sights on having NC2A qualifiers. 2 seasons ago, Maddie, who I mentioned, she did make the NC2As, which is really cool. She made it in the 200 and the 500. She went there. She did very well. Got a best time in the two, despite some pretty rough travel on our way out there. And she was our first qualifier for the women's side of the team since 2008. So that was a huge gap. And they'd had a couple of men's qualifiers kind of in the those years where they didn't know if they'd have a program. They had a really good 50 free guy that made it. But that's kind of where we're at now, is we're starting to target more specific performance oriented goals, where the NC2As are a goal. Winning championships is a goal. And overall, like, I think, despite, like, we can't really recruit either, like we can't affect the recruiting process for, or as far as admissions goes. So I'd say in terms of building, despite that, we've done a really good job of moving in a direction where we're more competitive on both sides.
So speaking of that recruiting process, as a D3 coach, and as a D3 coach in such a unique position at Santa Cruz, how do you like? What is the process that you take when you look at a prospective recruit? And like, if there's an athlete watching this or listening to this who wants to come to Santa Cruz, what can they do to make themselves like a more viable recruit?
So from our perspective, as I said, we cannot affect the admissions process. So, like, and I feel like I tell that to recruits sometimes, and they don't even believe me. They just think we don't want them. But quite often, no. Like we want you here. We just really can't help. So the first thing I'm looking at is GPA. UC has gone test blind, so your SAT, ACT scores don't affect it anymore. That's not something you put on the application. But so we're looking for people who we think can get into the school, and so the only pattern that I've been able to kind of figure out over the past few years is out of staters are getting it in at a high rate. So I'm looking out of state for recruits a lot more than I did in the first couple of years, and then athletes from parts of California that are underrepresented. So I've got a girl from Humboldt this year. Smaller area, tucked away up on the north coast there. Got a dude from Reading. I've got a kid from Taft, which is just outside of Bakersfield. He's a junior this year. But those are the kids who are getting in, and so we kind of target those areas. It's not to say we aren't recruiting in the Bay Area, in the LA area, in the Sacramento area. We are, but it's a lot less consistent in terms of what we see get in. For instance, I had a girl who had a 4.8 GPA get waitlisted and then not get in off the wait list, and that was pretty crazy to me. I'd never seen anyone with a GPA that high not be admitted, but that was our reality. So it's a really frustrating process for myself and my staff not being able to offer, that guarantee that they'll get in. So we ended up losing to people who really want to go to UC Santa Cruz, to other schools that can just guarantee them admission and a roster spot in the fall. So the best thing a recruit can do is, yes, we want to see fast swim times. We generally use sectionals as our minimum standard, for like a committed athlete, but we are really also looking for exceptional students, who have a nice balance of extracurriculars that make them more appealing to the admissions department in a way that, like, you know doesn't have anything to do with athletics, because that is a special talent they can list, but it's only one factor in what is a 13 point, evaluation, in the admissions department. So
I've got a brother who's a senior in high school who'll like to hear that because he's inching in on the sectionals times. Um, so the not being able to help with the admissions process, is that specific to D3 or is that
uh,
just a UC Santa Cruz?
that's specific to UC Santa Cruz. Now, I can't speak for all other D3s. I know there are some that have very little or maybe no ability to help the admissions process, but I also know of a number of D3s that can affect the admissions process. Now, there's no athletic scholarships in D3, which is, that's a pretty important across the board element to it. But they most of them, I think, can help in some way, shape, or form. Uh, when I was at NC2As, I was trying to pick as many different brains as I could, and most of them looked at me like I was insane when I was talking about the just not being able to control emissions at all. So um, there used to be a list that we had. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was like it helped, and it was, they'd hear a little bit earlier than the March 15th date that most people hear. But that was blown up when the Varsity Blues scandal hit, where it came out that essentially rich people were paying schools to
Mm-hmm.
admit their children as athletes, even though they weren't athletes. And the administrative burden that created kind of, took away that list. And so that we've been without it since.
That's an interesting ripple effect. I didn't I'd known about that whole scandal. I didn't know that it affected schools in that way.
Most schools, I think, were able to just take on that administrative burden. We just don't have the resources, so it's negatively impacting the schools that was like least likely to have
Yeah.
something of that nature happen. But so it's frustrating, but we're working on it. It's something that we're trying to build that relationship with the admissions office so that we can help our recruits out. But we don't know what the timeline on that will be.
So jumping back a few years to 2020, assuming I did my research right, the men won their first conference title in school history that year. And probably like a few weeks after that, everything shut down. What was
Yeah.
the like? as a coach, how did you sort of guide the team through that and help them move forward from this huge success to a few weeks later being like, all right, cool, we can't build on that at all for at least a little while?
Well, it was very challenging. So the early bummer of it was like before we realized how long that COVID was going to last and how it would affect the following season, because at the time we didn't think it would. It was just like even our banquet was over Zoom that year, and to come from that level of success, doing something that's never been done before, and then not be able to even celebrate it in person was just kind of disappointing. It felt weird, and like I don't know, I tried my best to make it fun and entertaining, but I think it came up short in a lot of ways. And then as we built towards the following school year, things still being remote, and then getting permission to actually get into our pool. Um, Initially they thought that would happen sooner rather than later, and then it just kept getting kicked down the road. And so what we did for the few folks that were in town, and we had a number of freshmen actually come stay in the dorms. You had to apply to do so. It was like an exception they would grant you, but we swam in the ocean because we didn't have access to the pool. So we were doing exclusively open water training a couple days a week. And then our captains, those two guys that I mentioned earlier, Mark and Paul, they were running open water workouts on their own, essentially. A few other days a week, they're doing dry land in their backyards, things like that. And all the while, like we could meet on Zoom, but not in person. So we were doing team meetings here and there over Zoom. I did like cooking with coach type thing, cooking with Crawford, where I literally just showed them how to cook some things, trying to get them to eat a little healthier, which is always a battle with college athletes. But, and then, some breath work stuff over Zoom, just different things, trying to keep them engaged. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty hard. And that when we finally got in the water, it was the end of February. So after our conference championship should have taken place, and we had 5 weeks before the conference championship did take place, and we had like I don't know, maybe 50% of our men's roster, probably less, and about 50% of our women's roster. So we trained 5 weeks. We went 5 days a week, singles, no dry land, and then or no weights, and then went to the conference championship and did our best. But most of the other teams have been training for 5 months, and that's how it looked. So we were not able to defend our title or even like get close to it on that side. But we actually placed better on the women's side because of this recruiting class, specifically those freshmen who came in and were instantly competitive, and it was really cool. So I swam at UC Davis, and my coach, he was still the associate head coach there, Pete. He ran a trials finals, so short course prelim, long course final meet that was literally just them and us in May of that year. So we were able to extend our season out, get another 6 weeks of training in, and go compete and rest and got a handful of best times and got to compete long course, which is obviously really unusual for college swimming. And it was a cool experience. It was cool to go back to UC Davis as a coach. But it it kept them engaged. At least it kept most of them engaged. Quite frankly, COVID ended some careers who just didn't want to go to the trouble of getting back into shape. They either stayed home or just chose not to, go out and be part of the training program or anything. So it was really hard. But when we came back, I felt like those that returned were so grateful to go back to some normalcy, to have that opportunity again, that we had really good engagement and a really good atmosphere around the team.
So you guys were out of the water for almost a year.
Yeah, I mean, almost, yeah, over a year, technically.
It's always just so interesting for me to hear about, like, from different coaches how COVID affected their season. For my college, I mean, I swam at Las Positas,
Yeah.
which Drake swam there too. We were lucky enough that we were back in the water by like June. And then we actually got to have like almost a full season that didn't count towards eligibility in 2021. So
Yeah.
it's just so interesting for me to hear like how different like college administration systems handled things and how different teams are affected. That's I mean, it's remarkable that you guys were able to keep the team together and then come back and put it together a consistent training schedule for a couple weeks and still manage to swim at the meet. Like that in itself takes a lot of composure and like willingness to just still be committed to a team.
Yeah, and a lot of that came from the freshmen. They were so excited to have their college swimming begin because it was delayed. That and like that was that class where we had like Maddie and Vivi, who I talked about, and the whole class like had this tremendous work ethic that we hadn't really had before, and they really got after it right off the bat. Just kept throwing different training at them, and just trying to account for our lack of a weight room, do a little bit of dry land on the deck, things like that. And but they were just excited, and so that we had good leadership, like I said, and we took it and ran with it. And we were able to we were in going into that that conference meet. It's like, yeah, we suited up, we rested for a day, but that was it. And so you're kind of just playing with house money there. Like there's zero expectation to swim fast, and we ended up swimming kind of fast. I think part of that just that looseness. And then when we went to the Davis meet, we hadn't swum any long course. I think we did one long course day. Like we swam long course just to make sure we remembered what it felt like, so that we were ready for the meet. But we swam okay. Like they put together good short course races and pretty solid long course races.
So one of my last topics that I want to discuss with you was just your mentality and your process as a coach. Like if you could take me through like an example of a test set that you do, like one of your most consistent test sets that you guys do, or just like a set that you guys do often, and then how you've seen that set progress the more you've done it, and then like you've talked about like the practice schedule as well. This is a loaded question. You've talked about the practice schedule as well. If you could talk about like what a week's worth of practice looks like and how you handle that, like people showing up to 8 out of a maximum 13.
Yeah. I'll run through the practice schedule real quick, just kind of how we break it down. So our main mornings right now are Mondays and Wednesdays. We lift for an hour and then we swim for an hour. And so the lifting actually looks a little different this year. This first time we've had actually like a real strength and conditioning coach. They're doing things a little differently than I've done in the past. Up until this year, I've programmed everything, but I really like it. They're incorporating more technical lifts like snatches, clean and jerk, things like that. Quite frankly, I didn't feel like I was capable of teaching well. So that's been really fun, and a really good element. And then there's a certain amount of it that I run too, but after we're in the weight room, we go into the pool and we do power because we're only in the pool for an hour. We do 2 to 300, and then we get going. A lot of parachutes, vertical kick with med ball, and we try and incorporate just a fair amount of kicking in those practices as well. And then so the way it works, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we offer 2 afternoons. So those are either 12:30 to 2:30, 2:30 to 4:30. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, we offer a morning where you can go 6 to 8, or preferentially go 1:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. And then Saturday we go dry land for an hour. It's starting at 7:30, and then we swim, from roughly 8:45 to 10:45. We have the pool till 11 in case we need to run over a little bit. But so that's 13 total workouts you can be at, and we cap you at 8. So Mondays is more of an aerobic focus. The distance folks do more of a distance oriented freestyle workout. The sprint and middle group does something more of a 500 aerobic type workout. And then there's an IM group on those days. Our associate runs the IM component, and our seasonal assistant Geo, he runs the distance group. So, and then Tuesdays we do race pace for mostly 200s. we do 50 work for some of the group, and then the distance group will do either 1,000 or 1650 focus things that we or that day. We do typically do a test set on Wednesdays. I'll touch on one in a minute to get to that part of the question. So we come all together as a group there. And then Thursday, kind of a more, IME type aerobic work for most of the group, but where we kind of tailor it to where you can still focus on your specific stroke, but it's just not as race pace focused. There's going to be a lot of drill. We try to kick heavy on Thursdays and just, more low end aerobic. And all this depends on time of year a little bit, but this is kind of the rough model. Friday, we go race pace again. So hundreds work, 2 IM work, or 500 work, depending. And then on Saturday, if we are not at a meet, I try to simulate racing. So, you know, maybe it's hundreds off the blocks, maybe it's some broken swims, but do something intense where they're getting up and competing with one another.
Sounds like a good
Um,
way to do it, where like it's not creating any really sense of redundancy in the workout. Like you could go to two different workouts on two different days, and it's completely different thing that you're working on.
yeah, and because of the class schedule, we do have people that do that. Like one of our guys, he has to do doubles on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so he goes to both those practices, and he's a 4 IMer, so there's almost nothing you can give to him that's not helping him. So in the morning on Thursday, he does the 4 IM focused, aerobic set, and then he comes back in the afternoon, and he can't make Wednesday afternoon, so he makes up that test set on Wednesday afternoon. Which, like, that's a brutal day, but like, he's a 4 IMer, he can handle it. So he's done a real good job with that, and that's just kind of one of our unique challenges with our class schedule. Um, and then going back to the test set thing, we do one kind of early season. We just kind of wrapped it up for the year, but it's 35's challenge. It's one I inherited when I took over the team, but you try to make 35 50s on 35, and you do them in either groups of 5 early season. We go groups of 7, so either 7 groups of 5, 5 groups of 7. And once you complete it on a certain interval, you get to go down 1 second. So you made them all on 35. Now you're on 34, but you only have to do 34 total. So you chunk one off the last round. And we've got a guy down. He's just completed the set on 30s. So that's pretty solid. But and you can kind of take that and you can tailor it to your stroke too. The IMers tend to do, a mix by round. So that's a fun one we like. Well, I don't know how much they like it sometimes, but and then another one I like that we do around this time of year is we just go 2100s on 150, and that one we go the first 15. We want heart rate 160, 170, so kind of in that upper range, but repeatable, and they're getting a lot of rest, so they can take it and get after it. And what we're looking for there is a lot of consistency with the times, as long as the heart rate's remaining consistent, and just kind of trying to find that threshold. And then the last 5 are best possible average, so no more heart rate taking, just get after it. And again, this is one where we have one dude, he does them all breaststroke, and he's really good 2 breaststroker. But some of them will go the first 10 back, last 10 free. Some of them mix some IM in there. But what we're really looking for is on those last 5 a departure from the comfort zone, and really being aggressive and just racing one another each one of those 100s. And what I like about that set is it's one we tend to have a lot of success at, and you're deriving a lot of value out of it in terms of like training the VO2 max end of things. But we have unsuspecting, like, people you wouldn't suspect really step up and do well, to the point where sometimes I'll tell them, okay, this last one's a get out. If you can beat this time on your last 100, we won't do the kick set I have after this, or something like that. And you see people really step up, like that girl Vivi, who she's not with us. She's not on the team anymore, but she used to throw on fins and do those last 5 butterfly, and her goal was usually, I'm going to be under 59 on all of them. And we have another girl now, one of our 2 flyers, Ruby, who's just kind of taken that tradition and run with it, and like it requires an incredible amount of toughness and courage, but they really get after the set. It's one of my favorites, and we usually do it either on a Wednesday or a Saturday, because the whole team does it together, and they really push themselves.
It sounds like something that like would motivate everybody collectively to be like, we'll do this together, we'll get through it together, and at the same time, like people can have a lot of fun with it. Like you said, mixing up the different strokes and equipment and like all the different variations you could do. So before we wrap things up here, at the end of every interview that I do, I always give the person I'm talking to time to promote something of their choice. So it can literally be like your Instagram, the team Instagram, team shop. Just it's more or less just time for you to speak whatever you want.
Yeah, my Instagram is just Coach Matt Crawford. And then the teams is UCSC Swim and Dive. Both those are great places to kind of check out what we're doing. Want to take the opportunity to promote my wife as well. She's a photographer. She has some really beautiful work that she puts up on her Instagram. It's Bex Wyant. She's done a lot of work in the swimming world.
Oh,
Uh,
I've seen her pictures.
yeah, so she's a really exceptional photographer, and
She was at the U.S. Open, right?
not this past one, no. She went to she's done a handful of meets. A lot of her stuff's been more in the brand space, but she went to South Korea and did that Worlds. A lot of really cool work from that. But she's done a lot of work with Sporty / Swim Outlet. Recently, she used to work with Fenice. But yeah, she has really cool swimming
That's so
content.
awesome.
So yeah,
That's so. I'll definitely put that in the description. I'm pretty sure I follow her. That's so awesome.
yeah, check her out. She's really good. Every once in a while, we get she'll come up and shoot during practice, so we get some cool underwater photography of the team. And she shot a couple meets for us in the past, and hopefully we'll do so again in January. And then actually, it's funny you don't think of D3 swimmers when you think NIL deals, but like we've gotten very a small amount of like Sporty has her do a shoot and they'll rent out the UC Santa Cruz pool. If you haven't seen our pool or our campus, it's beautiful. It overlooks the whole Monterey Bay. It's worth checking out. But and she needs to find her own model. So what they'll do is they'll contract out a handful of our athletes and they'll do a little bit of modeling for Sporty, and it isn't like a big paycheck or anything, but earn a little cash, and it's pretty cool. They've done a little bit of social media work with them in the past and things like that.
That's so awesome. I had no idea that connection was there. I have been to the Santa Cruz pool. My older brother graduated from there in 2018, so I did visit the pool. It's beautiful, and you're right. You can see like the whole Monterey Bay from there. It's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know this for sure, but we have to have one of the best views from a pool deck in the NC2A. Like it's pretty mind blowing once you actually sit on the deck and see everything. It's we get these killer sunrises coming up over Monterey and all that. So it's a really good environment and something we feel very lucky every day. So
That's awesome. Well, thanks, Matt, for sitting down with me. I'm glad we were able to set this up.
yeah.